The first one is housing in Nebraska, and how do you plan on getting more affordable housing for people in the state and also incentivizing people who want to come work in Nebraska to get houses then?
Well, actually, we've already started doing that. We just recently brought forward $90 million in ARPA funds, which I'm sure that you're already aware of. And those funds are actually the result of 4 different legislative bills that were combined into our budget this year. I know we have LB 724 that allows funding from local municipal option economic development funds. So we're on the pathway to addressing that, but I think that there's more than legislation that has to come from the executive branch as we move forward. So I feel like the legislature has done a really good job of setting the foundation because this has been a problem that we've been aware of for a very long time. And like so many problems in Nebraska, we tend to allow things to fester until they become a crisis. So we really need to fall forward fast and do better planning. I would like to see us look more into working with public-private partnerships and with our municipalities and counties, and really push revolving affordable housing loan funds. Because I feel that if we could do like a pilot buy down program in partnership with a program like that, we can keep the funds replenished, and we can also allow people to eventually buy their homes. There's a lot of really great programs that we've seen in bigger cities with even bigger issues than Nebraska has, where we've been able to use programs like that and turn vacant buildings into these great living communities, right? You can look at a warehouse and think, gosh, we want to fill that warehouse with more commercial businesses, which is great. But you can also look at a warehouse and go, what kind of community could I make that was affordable for people in Scottsbluff, Nebraska? Like if we have people that are working at the sugar beet factory, and we know that they're generally starting at like $15 an hour, and that they're going to be spending at least 30% of that income on housing, what can we offer them for affordable housing? And does it have to look like a house? Or does it have to look like an apartment? Or can it look more like a sustainable community? So I don't feel like Nebraska's really turned the corner on that yet. But when you look at other bigger communities, they've been very successful at that. And it actually costs less money than starting at the ground level. But I like starting at the ground level too, because it creates jobs. I just think we need to look at a mixture. And one of the things that we really haven't looked at in Nebraska that's been really successful, Iowa's got a great one in Council Bluffs, is that, you know, we have a strong arts community here in Nebraska, and we really haven't worked with that community on housing either. And they have a lot of successful programs for people that are in the arts, be they musicians, be they painters, be they I just lost my total train of thought. So we know that there's an opportunity to use funds that pertain to the arts for housing. And when we do that, we can do things where the residents can own like a bonus equity. So you pay your rent on time every single month up to $10,000. And what happens is they can take that money then and use as a down payment for a house moving out of that community. So there's a long list of creative things that we can be doing to help people in Nebraska when it comes to housing. I feel like when it comes to affordable housing, we've got a really good foundation started, but we're way behind the curve. And then again, that's because we wait until things are a crisis in Nebraska before we address them. And then we rush to put money into it, not really planning the future, just trying to fix the problem at the moment. So we need to stop doing that. I've never really seen a good strategic plan for affordable housing. We hear a lot about workforce housing, which is actually very different than affordable housing. So my plan is to have a better strategy, have a broader strategy, have more options that pertain to public-private partnerships, and working directly with our municipalities especially, on ordinances and zoning to make sure that those options will fit into those communities where we need to put them.
And you had mentioned that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that things don't get fixed in Nebraska if they don't become a crisis. Is that right?
Yeah, I think of a long list of examples.
And why do you think that is?
You know, in general, people have very short memories. And I believe that the media has desensitized people to what's going on around them. So for example, you look at something like Mead, Nebraska, which is probably our biggest environmental crisis in decades here in Nebraska. But it's been allowed to go on for a decade. And because it's been kept under wraps, it was allowed to fester and to get worse. And all Nebraska's done is basically filed a lawsuit, and that was last spring. So if we don't start pulling the trigger on things that hurt Nebraskans, if we don't start holding people at the executive branch especially accountable, these things are going to keep falling through the cracks. You know, another good example is our law enforcement training center. We've known for almost a decade that they needed funding, but that funding was not given to them. And as a result, we had waiting lists of law enforcement trainees across rural Nebraska that could not get trained. So it endangers our citizens. The list is long. Our prison system, we're in a crisis. We're overcrowded. I worked for the prison system in the late 80s and early 90s. It was overcrowded then. You can't keep putting Band-Aids on things, and you can't keep throwing money at the problems once they're in a big crisis, because that doesn't fix anything sustainably. I'd like to know, where's Nebraska's strategic plan? We have Blueprint Nebraska, which is kind of a blueprint for our corporate Nebraska, but where is our overall strategic plan for the state? We talk about how we want to save money. We talk how we want to save taxpayer dollars. But when we make legislation, that legislation is always a feel-good legislation that will only last for 2 to 3 years, but ultimately kicks the can down the road. So yeah, it's a long list of and I don't mean to finger point, but there's no way around it. There's a long list of things that have festered that ultimately are now costing taxpayers even more money than if we had addressed it at the very beginning.
And I'm going to move on to infrastructure and broadband now. Obviously, broadband is a huge topic across the state. So how do you plan on getting more access to the internet and broadband in rural areas?
Well, you do know we just recently gave $40 million for broadband expansion in Nebraska, and more money before that. And I have to tell you that we actually got off to a bad start when it came to broadband in Nebraska. Because one thing that I see us doing over and over again is we don't measure what we treasure. In other words, we give out money to fix things, or we think we're giving out money to fix things in Nebraska, but we don't have them report back to us in a way that we can say, okay, this was a good investment. Now, we have gotten better with that recently. 2 years ago, when we passed the grand compromise of economic development here in the legislature. But prior to that, a lot of our economic development, we couldn't really tell if it was a good investment. We had that same thing happen with broadband, and what happened then is rural Nebraska suffered. Now we're back on track. We are starting to track what's going on. But again, because we didn't have a strategy, we're trying to catch up and we're throwing money at the problem. The executive branch really needs to be looking into closing that digital divide and now looking at satellite broadband, because that's the next big thing. And we're not prepared for it. So here we are trying to catch up on bad decisions for broadband. And we have put the money in that's necessary to make that happen. So I feel that we're on the right path, as long as we keep our eye on the prize and we don't just let them go on their merry way again. But we need to start planning for the future technology, because for those Nebraskans that are still not getting broadband, with satellite broadband, everybody in rural Nebraska, no matter where they live, can now have broadband. So Nebraska is really bad at keeping up with technology, really bad at keeping up with technology. We can be saving our cattlemen, our farmers, our ranchers, our truckers. There's so many people in our industry that we could be saving money for, that we could be helping them make a bigger profit, and we could be saving taxpayer dollars if we would just step up to the plate and really embrace what technology has to offer us as a state, from cybersecurity to AI for infrastructure. We're way behind other states. And it shouldn't be, because we've got the university right here in Nebraska. We've got the talent to move Nebraska forward technology wise. And we really don't tap into that to the magnitude that we should.
And then, so if quote unquote throwing the money at the problem isn't working, and then what would your solutions be other than doing that?
For me, I have been elected official for quite a while. And one of the first things I did when I was on the Bellevue City Council is I pushed for strategic planning, because a community, a state, a county, anybody that doesn't do strategic planning, they're just writing checks. You've got to bring everybody to the table. And that means everybody to the table to do a strategic plan for Nebraska. So we know where we want to go. So say we did a strategic plan 15 years ago and said, okay, we have a rural broadband issue that's costing the farmers money because they can't participate in the internet. It's costing our students time because they can't get their homework done if they take their computers home from school. We knew all these problems were going on. If we'd all come together and done a strategic plan and set the budget to address that, we would be at a different place right now. Same with infrastructure, same with the prisons, same with how we treat our environment. So for me, it's about bringing everybody to the table, putting together a strategic plan, because a strategic plan is a living, breathing document, and you revisit it every year, right? So everybody comes back to the table every single year, and everybody buys into it because everybody participated in it. So instead of one person working towards a cause or 49 senators working towards a cause, you've got everybody involved working towards that ultimate cause. So that includes every level of government. To me, it seems impossible that you would run a state without including all levels of government in those decision-making, in that decision-making. And a really good example of us not including people are all the unfunded and underfunded mandates that we hand down to local government, which is ultimately the reason our property taxes are never going to go down. Poor planning, knee-jerk reactions, throwing money at problems once they fester has been something that's been going on for decades in Nebraska.
And you hit on my next point, which are property taxes. What are your plans on lowering them and also improving the economy?
So there's a couple things that concern me. So a lot of the property tax bills that have come across my desk in the legislature have been temporary fixes, have been something that really did benefit those making a lot of money in Nebraska, but never really the middle class or below. And so what we need to do is we need to find ways to reduce property taxes that show longevity. And we need to make sure that it pertains to our economy. So for example, this year I brought forward what's known as a circuit breaker bill. And it's not going to get out of revenue, which is really unfortunate because circuit breaker bills have longevity and they're used in other states. And the way a circuit breaker bill works is that if I'm a farmer, for example, and I have a bad year, which could happen this year because we have a drought going on in Western Nebraska. If I have a bad year and my income goes down for that year, the circuit breaker immediately gives me property tax relief. If I'm a middle-class worker and I lose my job and my income goes from 60,000 to 25,000, I immediately get property tax relief. But then if I do better and my income goes back up to 60,000 or my farm does better, then I get less relief or no relief depending on what's going on, right? So there are opportunities for us to really help people that are struggling that we ignore because we want to do it all or nothing type of legislation. But beyond that, the foundation of what our property taxes are based on is defective. For over 20 years, we have been giving unfunded and underfunded mandates down to our municipalities and our counties and our schools, to political subdivisions. So think about it. Every time we pass a bill and there's a cost involved, and we pass that cost on down to local government, like a county, we live in what's called a Dillon's Rule state. counties are creatures of the state. What that means is that if they continually have burdens that are financial, there's really only one way they can pay for it, and that is by raising your property taxes. So what happens is the people at the state level constantly point their fingers at the local level saying, you know, it's not us. It's the local level that's making your property taxes high. And we're going to keep trying to push legislation through to punish them and tie their hands so they can't spend as much. But yet they keep passing down the mandates. So look at a county like Johnson County, which has, I think, like 6,000 to 7,000 people maybe in the county. We have a state prison there, right? Tecumseh State Prison. Tecumseh State Prison. The reason I say that twice is I want everybody to remember, right? I'm using the word state. So when an inmate dies in a state prison, it is not the state that pays for that autopsy. It is the county that pays for that autopsy. It is not the state that pays for the grand jury investigation when the inmate dies. It is the county that pays for that grand jury investigation when they die. So think about it. There's been several inmates that have died this year in that prison, right? So a small county like Johnson County then has to make decisions like, can we put gravel on this country road this year? Can we scoop the snow on this road this year? Because our budget keeps getting tapped into because we're constantly paying for things that have been mandated to us. If you go to a fast growing county like Sarpy County, this year alone, they have over $10 million in unfunded mandates. So for example, if you have a state judge in your county, it is the county that pays for their staff, not the state. It is the county that pays for their office space. The list is long. I actually have a bill this year that says I'm hoping that it gets passed and it goes on the ballot. And it says that we can't push legislation through unless we can show how we can pay for it. We want our property taxes to go down. We've got to stop pointing fingers at local government. We've got to stop handing down unfunded and underfunded mandates. We need to fully fund our schools, which we do not do in Nebraska. And we need to be responsible for how we spend our money. So people will always say, well, government spends too much money. Well, yeah, but so what we do is we do a smoke and mirrors thing. We're still spending the money, but we're putting on the backs of the taxpayers at the local level. So we can pretend it's not us. So if we want to lower property taxes, we have to stop the unfunded and underfunded mandates. We have to fully fund our schools. And we have to hopefully pass this legislation that I've brought forward this year. And I think the citizens of Nebraska are going to vote in favor of it. Why would you ever bring a bill forward without showing how it can be paid for? And to be really frank, we were what, $1 billion in the hole when I came into this body. We dug our way out of it. But I remember the first 2 years, if you had a bill that had a fiscal note, you couldn't get it passed. There's a lot to be said for that, right? If you have a fiscal note and you don't know how to pay for something, maybe it's not a good bill. Anything worth having is worth paying for, but not on the backs of the taxpayers. And we have to stop pretending that that's not what's going on. And I can tell you that I've traveled all over Nebraska. And when I talk to people about unfunded and unfunded mandates, and I bring forward how much is being spent in their county, and I have a long list if anybody ever wants to see it in my office, how much each county spends every year in unfunded mandates. Voters are surprised. People don't know that it's local government that's paying for those things. They think their tax dollars that they pay to the state is paying for it. So it's really unfortunate. So when it comes to lowering property taxes, we have to start with that. That's a systemic issue. And once we fix that, then we have to start looking at rural Nebraska and how we appraise property. And we have, again, made movement forward, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. So we can do better. It's going to take 3 to 4 years to really get it on track. It's not going to happen overnight. But I will tell you, consumption tax is not how we do it. I know a lot of people are pushing consumption tax. If you put pen to paper, consumption tax will have us millions of dollars in the hole within the next 3 to 4 years of doing it. It also is going to put taxes on my seniors. I have a lot of seniors in my district. on their medication, on their groceries, which is currently not taxed, by the way, on their doctor's visits. It's not sustainable. If it was, other states would have done it a long time ago. So it's another grandiose plan that people are pushing forward, telling you that that's the solution to lowering property taxes, but pen to paper shows otherwise. It shows the math is skewed and that we're going to start a secondary issue. And then for my rural friends, I always tell them on consumption tax, think about it. All this money comes back into the state. Each individual subdivision will do their own budget. The money comes back into the state, and then the body gets to start doling out that money. We have more urban senators than rural senators. Rural Nebraska's already lost one senator. They were supposed to lose two based on the census, but we negotiated and let them and helped them to keep one. Why is everybody so trusting that when they put that pot of money there for people to fight over, that they're going to get their fair share in rural Nebraska? It's just human nature for urban senators to get as much money as they can for urban Nebraska. And there's more urban senators than rural senators. And so really, we're really gambling with people's tax dollars. And consumption tax is not going to benefit Nebraska in the long run. It's going to be a short-term solution. And what people don't know is there's a sister bill that allows local municipalities to also push forward consumption tax. So you're going to get it twice.